funny why, but.
Okay, you're live. You can start.
14. Multitasking. Did you want to start?
No, shut the session down. So
Can everyone hear us on Zoom?
Just Zoom is on.
Oh.
Okay.
So let's not go.
But we don't see any.
Variables.
Yes, okay.
In the meantime, who would like to see?
We're ready. We're on.
We're
They can hear, we're good to
Yeah.
go? Okay, awesome. So then I'm gonna turn it over to Greg and team to take us through the behavior education plan with the recommendations that came from the committee.
Great, and I'm just going to say by way of quick introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Linda to get things rolling. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just remind everybody where we are with this DEP. So while this was developed 2 years ago and adopted by the board for implementation, we ran into the pandemic, did not implement this, of course, last school year because implementation was possible. So what you're getting right now is our first run at reviewing, analyzing, and figuring out any revisions we want to make. We learned a lot this year, and you're going to hear about that. And I'll just say on behalf of the team too, we appreciate the feedback that we received. That's the time we sent it out now. So thank you, and Linda and team, the floor first.
Thank you. One of the things I wanted to say first was to thank everyone who provided feedback. Because we did look at all of that and incorporate that into the information that you received and that you'll hear about more from Faith and Janelle tonight. But I also want to highlight something that Gina just said in terms of framing our mindset in this conversation we're going to have. She made mention of the fact that of when behavior shows up. I want to dispel the myth that we're ever going to get to a point where there is no behavior infractions that happen in an adolescent space or in a space of life with adults. Like it just doesn't exist. And so at times when we were looking at the data, we were like, wow, we have to put in perspective that we work with 3,000 plus people between the ages of 14 and 17 and sometimes 18 and on other campuses up to 22. And we are dealing with numbers that sometimes are shockingly low in terms of like students having things happen, but nevertheless still sometimes shocking that things happen. So we will talk about things that are not necessarily pleasant, like fighting and things of that nature, but I would like to make sure that we're all thinking from a mindset of shifting the conversation from thinking that'll ever just stop, but who we are being as individuals responding to that. That is what a behavior education plan is truly about. How are we responding to infractions and incidents as they happen? So if that's the way we can go into it looking, that will help us in terms of the conversation that we have around the data and around the request of or suggested changes that were made by the team as they were working with the BEP this year, what was working, what needed some adjustment, and then where we landed now so that we can go into next year with a different and even revised and more improved BEP. So I am going to turn it over to Janelle and to Faith, who are going to talk a little bit more about the information you received, and then of course we'll have time for questions and all. So thank you. Faith?
And so we do have a presentation, but it's actually what we're going to be utilizing tomorrow for the board meeting. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, we're not going to actually use a presentation for this evening. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit
So we
of
could take that off.
So first and foremost is that we want to thank everybody for being incredibly thoughtful around the behavior education plan and really giving some great feedback. Throughout this year, really what we've done is to try to take a critical lens around how we're implementing, is it working the way we anticipated, and then where are those areas of opportunities. And some of the things we were noticing this year were really obvious and they made sense. Other things, as the year progressed, we were able to determine, should it look different, should it feel different? But it's really intended to support students. And oftentimes, I think Principal Parker stated, kids are misbehaving, it still happens, but our job is really to build their capacity. So we want to make sure that we are offering them feedback, building capacity and doing things in a way so that they're not continuing to make the same mistakes or the same infractions. All right, so I know you guys did receive the memo, which kind of outlined the changes that we were recommending. And from there, we received some feedback from you guys around, questions around why isn't this being changed, or is there an area of opportunity here? So we wanted to talk a little bit about that and then talk to you guys kind of around next steps. So some of the suggestions from the CCB were a few things is relating to non-consensual sexual activity. Why is it not considered a level 5? So I'm going to list those and we're going to kind of unpack those and kind of the decisions we made kind of moving forward. Possession of an image, nude or partially nude, why doesn't it start at a level 4? Displaying genitals begins at a level 2, why not a level 3? And then somebody also inquired around the detentions, what does that look like and feel like here at our school? And then possession around a lookalike gun, and a little bit more about our thinking behind that as well. Okay, please feel free to jump in or if you have any questions or thoughts on that too. Janelle, I'm gonna have you start with kind of explaining the detention policy, a little bit of what our detentions look like here, and then I'll start to go through the details.
Sure, and I also want to thank you all for taking time to go through. We do put a lot of time and love and effort into this work, and so we appreciate that you also do the same and really reading through things and giving us feedback. It's really helpful. And so what we were happy to see that there were not many, things that people didn't agree with. And so we're thankful for that. And so we do want to kind of list the things, the questions that people did have or suggestions for us to do something different than what we had initially recommended. So one of the questions was about detentions, and that was one of the things that we kind of forgot about when we were revamping the code of conduct into the behavior education plan, with a true focus on minimizing the use of exclusionary discipline so that we could be more in line with Senate Bill 100, and also trying to simply be more restorative and less punitive. And so we really put a focus on the use of suspensions, and you should see that throughout the 5 levels of responses. And we really kind of forgot about the fact that we will also give a detention sometimes. And so lunchroom behaviors, throwing food, I had a boy eating an apple without permission, kind of very minor infractions will often result in a lunch detention or sometimes an after school detention. We get kids that are, sometimes being in an unauthorized area, we catch them in the process of cutting a class, they may get an after school detention. So we do still issue detentions, though we haven't spent a lot of time talking about that. But they do still exist, and we wanted to make sure that that's spoken about because we were detention heavy prior to the BDP when we had the tardy policy in HERO. And so we went away because that really was the bulk of the detentions that we issued, forgetting that we do still issue them some for behavior related infractions.
Yep, I have questions. Do you want them as we go? Yeah. Okay, so my question is about the detentions. Are they used as reteaching opportunities? And I taught middle school, I got middle school at heart, and sometimes reteaching may not necessarily be something that works for middle schoolers. But if they are used as reteaching opportunities, do they work for high schoolers? I don't know. I feel like high schoolers already know everything they need to know, so it's harder to sometimes. Yeah, so curious about that.
So we do not have devoted staff in our detention spaces specifically doing that. I would say that the reteaching happens in the conversation with me today.
Okay.
When you are having to be spoken to about your behavior, I am spending that time, you and I, talking about the behavior, what's wrong with it, what harm have you caused, and how can we correct it?
Mm-hmm.
That time happens in my office. During detention, it's time for homework. Now, we are fortunate to have the kind of staff, our security staff monitors the detention spaces who have really deep relationships with kids. And so not that we have ever instructed them to, that is just a part of the culture here. They are talking to kids about why are you here? How do you not get here again? But is it a structured thing that we have put into place? I would say no, because the teaching happens in the conversation with the dean. But they are also there getting some beneficial talking to as well during that time.
Okay, I have a follow-up. So it sounds like prison. I'm just gonna say this for the record. It sounds like detention is like that place you go and you're just being held there, but you do get a conversation afterwards. So I would love to have more conversations with students around what is going to shift their behavior, right? Having more conversations with them about, hey, like not even necessarily the students that are the ones that are exhibiting behaviors, but other students, like what, as a peer, what do you think might be beneficial? Like what's gonna work to get things to be different? I just would love to bring in the voice of that. And then also, like, I know my comment was kind of harsh. I don't mean it harsh in the way that like, don't have detention. I'm not saying that. And I'm also not saying that there's an expectation that if you're restorative, you're not, like restorative, there's this misnomer that if you're restorative, you don't have consequences. That's not accurate. Like you do have consequences. Every action has an opposite and equal reaction. So yes, consequences are part of this. And I would expect that too. I just would love to see what could be developed with that, especially depending on what the behavior actually is. And I know that the conversations that you and the staff have with them at following, absolutely.
Before they serve.
Before they go in to serve the detention, but then, so what about after? Like, so there's a piece for me that I'm wanting to see, like, the holistic whole of it, so.
Feedback. I
Yeah,
don't think currently we have anything in place for that, but I think that's something kind of speaking to, like, how are we gonna be different moving forward?
right,
So that it feels the most different.
yeah, because if you have a conversation before the detention, and then they sit in the detention, and then they go, and I don't know, I just feel like there's some level of, like, when I, it's just maybe just personal, the way I do it. When I do restorative, I always, there's a like 2-week follow-up, there's like a 3-week follow-up, or 2 weeks, and then usually I go back in a month, and like just to follow up, like, so what's been happening and how has your life shifted since we've done these things? So I think I'm kind of wanting to know about that, but I'm not, the detention sounds like that to me, but I'm not saying like, don't give you consequences, so like, I don't want you to hear that. And even though I know my words can be harsh.
I appreciate that feedback, and I will add, that loop happens certainly with any in-school reflections with the more significant consequences. And you know, my boy that keeps stealing apples, well, then he's not stealing because they're free.
But say we're like not even taking it, but.
He's just chewing, he's just eating it while in line, waiting on the long line.
And he puts it at the right.
He's leaving the core. And so, but again, and we had a deep conversation about it, he went and apologized to the head of food service, so I would say that we are spending a good amount of time even on these pretty lower level things, and anything that is of significance that we need to circle back on, I would say we do.
Okay.
Some things I don't know require it because of the time that we spend on it running, and what I know that they are also going to get in the room. And we often will have a security person come back and say, let me tell you what we talked about. It's probably gonna be something you should follow up on. That also happens.
Okay, that's helpful, that's really helpful, thank you, yeah.
Well, I think too, in thinking about the discipline, it looks and feels very different. So I'm sure there's been stories, you guys have heard things about students that have chosen to do the apples and then put the core back, which is kind of a matter of, you get a detention and you have to actually go talk to the person that you caused the harm for. We had a situation earlier this year where we had students that were vandalizing the bathrooms, and so they're, you know, working with our custodial staff, our buildings and ground staff, to kind of say, this is what this looks like, and these are the folks that you're impacting. And high school can be one of those really tricky ages where you also want to make sure that the adults involved in it aren't also going to go through additional harm working with high schoolers. So we really have to do a lot of front loading with those students when we have a less traditional, more kind of creative way of working through the discipline infractions as well as the restorative work. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense, yeah, thank you. I mean, all of that is helpful, I just always like to hear from the teachers about like how it feels on the ground too, because
Absolutely.
because it's a, yeah, well, I'm a teacher, so I can't help it. I want to hear what, like, how it feels on the ground for the teachers. So.
Yeah. Does anybody want to jump in? Any of our?
I think vandalizing a school is a crime.
It is a crime.
Okay, so it's a crime. I mean, if you want to give them a couple of chances or something, that's fine. But at some point in time, it's a crime. So there has to be consequences, not just detention for an hour and have a couple of guys talk to you about it.
And then let's clarify a couple things. We didn't give a detention for the vandalizing of the schools.
Well, I'm just saying.
We need to.
No, you're
I'm
clarify
just saying it should
that.
be more serious than the detention if
They
it
didn't
is more
get, our
serious.
vandalizing students have not gotten.
And I do think too, the behavior education plan kind of lays out, like, to what you're speaking to now. It lays out like that there are certain infractions that are treated
Yes.
completely differently.
Call the police,
And-
leave them at the front door, don't worry about it anymore.
Well, and I will say this,
Well, I don't know
because
if
we, at the school, we are not the criminal justice system. Like, we have, that is why our behavior education plan is separate from when a crime is committed and you call the police for that, which we call police for criminal activity. But the behavior education, as a school, we don't have a jail to put someone in, whether it feels like prison or not, we don't have that. We don't have bars, we don't have gates, we don't have lock, we don't do that. So.
And when we talk about how we discipline students and the school to prison pipeline that everyone is very well aware of, we have to be careful as a school how we choose to respond to, yes, things that are a crime. And so, yes, vandalism is a crime, but do I really want to call the police on a kid who stopped up the toilets and have them hauled away and arrested? I don't know that I do know, as this school has said that is not how we want to treat kids when they make poor choices. And so there may be other schools that do react in that way, but we don't, because we are trying to teach kids and understand that even, some of the greatest kids may make some significantly poor choices, and that experience of having to deal with the police because you stopped up the toilet can have such a significant impact. And as a school, I think we have said that we do not want to do that to kids for juvenile poor choices that deserve us spending more time with them, teaching them. And so as a school, we have chosen to not contribute to that school to prison pipeline in this way.
And not consequences, in the sense of even if there has to be a recoup because damage has been a monetary
We do
amount,
assess
we do
monetary.
assess that to, families. So it's not as though we just say, well, I guess we'll just have to clean this up and deal with it. That does happen.
I do appreciate the distinction that you made there though, right? Like this is an institution of learning and not an institution of punishment. And we're not involved in criminal justice. That's not what we do here. And I appreciate you making that distinction, because one of the main reasons why, at least me as a board member, voted to remove police officers from our school and instead invest in other support services was because that's not our business. That's not the business that we're here for. The business that we're here for is educate. And if we're going to educate, we need to educate around behavior as well. But there are some things that do require that we call in the police department, and that's a different piece. But I do appreciate you bringing up that what we're talking about here is the behavior education plan for what we handle inside of a school as a, right? I see how I weed myself into it, like I'm part of the we now.
Yes.
Thank you, yeah.
You can see, it's hard with the math, I'm like, who said what?
No, I just heard you talking about like teacher input and et cetera, and I, full transparency, asked a question about detentions and what that looks like in the school. And I'll speak on behalf of us, because JP and Son and I all work together looking at the plan and asking questions and applauding all other spaces as well. So I can't say that I've necessarily felt any feedback or talked with any students who have served detention. I just know it's one of those things that's talked about in the district, right? Like the detention, but just didn't really know what that looked like in our space. And so that's really where my question came from. So that was just some transparency I was going to ask.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I can add on to that as well. Like I know my own personal experiences and from some of my close colleagues that we have so many conversations as part of that restorative practice before we ever reach out to a dean. And so that is like at my previous district, I had like a stack of detention where I was in charge, and here it's very different. And so there's I do believe that before the student ever gets to the dean, the teacher has talked to the student many times. And so just to kind of add into another layer of support.
I think our teachers are managing quite a bit within their spaces too. I think there's like huge, because oftentimes, hopefully we only get the bigger things when they get to us, but the teachers do a with the relationship piece as well as making sure that they're managing within their spaces has been tremendous. I know this is my first year here in the building, but a lot of things are happening within their spaces and being managed there with those relationships they have with those students. So.
And I can't tell if people raise their hand online and have something to say, so Lisa, will you let us know if the online folks
Sure.
are,
Can we finish that?
yeah, if anybody online raises your hand, like use the virtual hand raiser so we can know that you want to speak.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so another one of the suggestions was around the non-consensual sexual activity to be considered for a level 5. And so we, so the dean, just to explain to you guys, we came together with all kind of the feedback to have a conversation, just to make sure, one, we also always want to be on the same page as it relates to this, but to really have a robust dialogue around that. And so we talked together, we felt that was a very appropriate to move non-consensual sexual activity to a level 5. And so that is like to make in the based on that recommendation. In addition, possessing an image nude or partially nude, the question was, why does this not start at a level 4? And so we spent quite a bit of time kind of unpacking this and discussing this. And one of the things we felt was needed first was a little bit more education for our students around possessing images of nudity or partial nudity. It's a little bit more frequent than I think when I was here, that students have these things on their phone. And so making sure that we're front loading, giving some information around just the impact of that in students before we start to think about that level change. So we absolutely heard that feedback. We just wanted to kind of front load them first before we start issuing a level 4 for that. But I'd be open, we want to be open and listen if there's feedbacks or thoughts around that.
It's really about that education piece. Kids are consensually sharing photos of themselves. And so we just didn't feel that the response to that is to slam with a harder consequence, but do more educating because they think it's okay. They think they're not going to get caught. And to me, it said, we just have to do more educating because that while that's also a crime, right? Like that is not kids' intention. That is, they need more education around it.
I was just going to say, I know that at least we, as a teacher, we asked that as well, and really just looking for clarity, yeah. Probably us. I'm hearing those questions, like, that's us.
Just so you know, we're on your list.
But what I want to say is like, it really was a question, truly just a why. Why is this here? What's the background on this? So I just want to say thank you, because I'm sure you're going to continue providing that. And we are on, I'll speak for myself. I understand where you're coming from, and that makes sense.
And thank you, really, thank you. We talked earlier this school year, about having teachers on this committee, how powerful that is for what we're trying to do. It's something that we haven't always had, certainly not only having 3 who have been consistently part of this team, but the fact that the 3 of you got together, coordinated, collaborated, gathered feedback, gave to this committee, it's powerful. So it's exactly what we want out of CCB. And so really, thank you.
And I'm just gonna add to, again, in terms of, as we shift our mindset, I often do a thought process on the tree and the fruit that the tree bears, correct? Because I see children as the fruit, and then there are us adults who have bore this fruit. And I'm very concerned oftentimes when children bear the brunt of things that they have fairly learned from the environment they have been in, or the tree that raises them or is responsible for them, and how this plan has to be there to address those issues. So when we think about our society, like think back to I Love Lucy, when there were 2 separate beds and you could not show, like we don't know where Ricky came from, little Ricky, because they didn't do that, right? To now where like it's just all out. You have to help to explain how, like, these boundaries we speak of, because that's not the common message everywhere. So sometimes we just think, oh, you should know this. Like, why would you do this, right? That's not our common maybe, but it's another common that's out there that you can't just knock the fruit because they've picked up on that common. It's a teaching of why this may not be the best way and how there are different ways to approach it, which is why I appreciate that thought process is going in it. So we're not just, oh, you should have known. And it was just like how would I have known that? Like, this is what everyone does.
Right, this is the norm.
This is correct.
Right.
This is, yes.
And I think, again, cannot thank you guys enough, because I think one of the things that we as a team, it was a really robust conversation around what about this or what about that? Again, pornography, how are we making sure? But I think once we kind of really leave with that instruction, then you can come back and say, okay, now you have this learning. Now if you're making the decisions, these are kind of the repercussions of that. So in addition to that, so displaying genitals, the question was, why does it begin at level 2? And again, a very deep discussion around, are we talking about a penis, buttocks, breast, and trying to get to, knowing that it's pretty generalized in that space. And right now, buttocks is, I love how everybody has such a serious face when I talk about these things. I appreciate it. That buttocks is included in that. And so the concern was, unless we separate those out, that we really want to encompass that kind of as well, as opposed to having that start at the level.
Is that clear that the infraction includes buttocks and genitals? It's the same infraction. And so many people might feel that a buttock is less offensive than genitalia, and so we don't treat them the same. We would have to have a conversation about if we feel that they should be separate, each having their own line, so that then they could be reacted to differently. Currently, bearing any of those parts are its own one infraction.
Buttock could be a singular.
I was just thinking that.
Say that again?
I said you didn't know buttock could be a singular. I just wondered if you
no.
had any questions. Yes.
What about breasts? Are breasts?
Breast, when we actually, and that was another thing that we talked about. Yeah, so breast is part of that, where it's also depending on which adult you're speaking to. Some people think, well, breast should be, coupled with buttocks. I mean, we were going back and forth. We're kind of like, we don't want to make it subjective. So something that might be upsetting to me, maybe somebody else may say, oh, that doesn't bother me in the least bit. And so right now we're continuing to kind of group them all together, but understand, like I said, that yes, they offend people on different levels. But
And I think it also speaks to like not sexualizing the body.
Yeah.
It's body parts.
Yes.
Body parts, and then
Body
coming
parts.
from that space, yeah.
yes, yeah, which is, I know, the direction that we're moving as well. And so in addition to going back to the non-consensual, what we did want to add is touching. And so we talked about, so which is different than sexual activity. So touching, recommending that to move to a level 4. So separating, we have touching and we have sexual activity. Sexual activity would be a 5. Non-consensual touching would be a level 4.
Yeah, why wasn't it a 5 also? I mean, it's non-consensual.
We did talk about that too, and when we go to touching, we talked about like, does that constitute if it's a hug? Does that constitute if, just some of the different things that are non-consensual and should be appropriately dealt with, but is different than a rape, is different than an assault,
A kiss, like an unwelcome kiss versus a rape. That's all sexual activity, and so we do have to make some distinctions there when it comes to what sexual activity is.
Thank you for your thoughtful discussion on it, right?
Yeah, this would be,
Because, and the need to have that, because it is completely different time than we, right? And I don't ever like that as an excuse, well, they're from that time and that was like how it was then. But you have to understand the mindset of our youth is different now. But there are certain things that are still, we have to hold a certain space in line for what's unwelcome, right? Period, what's unwelcome.
and again, I think the education piece around that is continuing to be something around, yeah. Because oftentimes I think when we're having those conversations with students, the discipline and restorative is that oftentimes there's a misinterpretation of what was welcomed, touch or welcomed engagement with a student. Oh, they were laughing or they were, and so that also is something that we're continuing to kind of explain to students. Sometimes laughing is because you're uncomfortable, sometimes it's kind of, but those are things that are happening within those spaces as well. I was talking to students around what it could look like someone's uncomfortable, but they don't always show up in the same way maybe you do when you're uncomfortable.
I'm just thinking the whole real world episode, I'm sorry. I'm old.
It's very normalized in our society, right, whether through social media or just television. And so I do agree that, like school is a learning space where we are here to teach kids. And I also from my understanding with the behavioral education plan, there's a progression where if the student continuously is touching somebody inappropriately, okay, we warned you once, now you're doing it again, we will respond differently. And so
Thank you for that.
So is there an orientation or something where we explain this to incoming freshmen or when they're coming up upperclassmen or?
So like the BEP specifically or more around like
Well,
specific?
Maybe a generalized BEP type of thing of, I mean, we can't just hand kids 20 pages and expect them to know what's in there.
No, absolutely. It's actually interesting you brought that up. So Jeremy Christian over at Julian Middle School had talked about having, with the Brooks Middle School as well, having some of the deans come over to talk a little bit kind of around what the expectation could be for our incoming freshman students. So that was something I'm hopeful we can get it off the ground. But there's been, like I said, between the pandemic and just some other things, but really kind of setting the stage for what the expectation is for our students.
Okay.
In addition to that, the Husky kickoff day, there's also kind of some of that worked into that. Because again, we have to show students what we expect from them within these spaces, but really trying to front load it and not like, hey, you know, you can be expelled for this, or hey, do you know you can be, but really these are kind of what, you know, my son who's in middle school now, some of the things he said, I'm like, middle schoolers are very interesting and I love middle school students, but some things he doesn't understand, his friends don't understand, those are things that in high school would get you certain levels of consequences too. And so making sure coming from a place of they probably just don't know, but how can we front load them so they don't get in a situation where some of these infractions are pretty serious.
And I also just want to point out, because it's convenient, I'm sorry, Karen, just 1 second, I want to make sure I get you in. We try to reinforce this throughout the school year in terms of not only making them aware of what's going on with BEP, but communicating kind of our positive expectations for overall school culture and climate. And if you would just allow me for a moment to illustrate this point, Linda, if you could stand up and turn around so we can see the back of the t-shirt.
A walking billboard.
Yes. These are the Husky Habits, right? And so we're just constantly trying to get these expectations when we want to be out there. So. Thank you, Dana, you did very well. Karen, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to, that's great if you're starting to do it with the transitional with the 8th graders. I think that's very important. There's also kids that are totally new to the district as freshmen. And they need to especially be inculcated into the culture. So hopefully, do we do anything particular special for kids that are actually totally new to Oak Park or the district or anything?
We do for students that are transferring in, we have a transfer breakfast. We have a couple of things that are set up to kind of help them acclimate with our school a little bit. We also have some support systems for them. One of the things though, as I was talking to the counselors more recently, we get a lot of kids that transfer in the middle of the year. Like I think we got 2 students last week, those students. And so figuring out a way, how can we make sure that they're getting the same level of experience, you know, if they're not captured within that first month of school. And so we're gonna think about what that's gonna look like, but we do have some supports in place for students that transfer in.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Two quick things. It's indicated on our Skyward for teachers that they're a transfer student. Even for freshmen who've like moved into Oak Park, I have that. So that makes me aware as a teacher that they might need a little extra attention, especially early in the year. And then our PE department is having conversations freshman year with consensual versus non-consensual. They have a whole curriculum built around that. That's really having these important conversations with our students in a safe space.
And then there's a sophomore version and now a junior version, I believe, isn't it? And I believe we can do some boosters of that curriculum.
I wanted to ask a question about how do we, because I know we are talking about our incoming freshmen or transfer students. I'm thinking about our existing students because as we think about the ongoing shaping and modifying of behavior, when we're working from a proactive place, we're doing things proactively to remind our students what that looks like. So if we have the Husky Habits, how do we highlight examples or exemplars of what those Husky Habits are for our students? Because our students are going through things daily. There's a lot that impacts the brain of our students, and there may be times where I may not be always cognizant as a sophomore, or as a senior who's taking college board exams, going through puberty. I may not be mindful of all of what's in there and expected of me. So if I'm in a space or within the learning community and there are examples of what reliable, respectful, responsible, what have you looks like, then it's constantly top of mind for me. If only a transfer student is getting that kind of, boot camped into what the expectations of the high school looks like, our other rising sophomores, juniors, and seniors need to be kind of constantly reminded of that. And reminded of, this is what you not do, but this is what the Husky habits are, so that they can see what that is and be reminded of that. It's just something to consider.
No, absolutely. We do have, we're identifying those students, yeah, Parker, like, we're identifying those exemplars, but even finding more so, so the counselor Maggie Cahill, and I believe she's working with a group of a few other, but where there's trying to kind of these students within our space that are these exemplars that really can make sure that, one, information is getting out around, because it's something about a peer-to-peer. It feels and lands in a different way. On top of that is when we identify those exemplars, they can get Parker perks. They're announced over the intercom, there's a bunch of things, but I think we want to continue to publicize that. So kids, they hear the student's name, but like, what are they doing because of, to get that recognition? So continuing to your point, really kind of sharing, this is what we expect, but this is, this is what it looks like and plays out as, as a student here.
So not just seeing, hearing the students saying who may have demonstrated specific behavior, I'm also referencing, what does responsibility look like?
What does it actually look like?
What does reliability, defining that for them, so that they're looking at that and saying, oh, I can remember, this is an example of being a reliable human being, being responsible. Not so much and which is wonderful that they are seeing their peer recognized for what those habits are, but defining what they are, what they look like, what does that include? Because some of our students don't know.
And I think that's a part of the community norms, that these are community norms.
Yeah.
Where you,
I was just gonna add that in our news scene, we've added a section of PSAs. And the PSAs touch on different topics of Husky habits. So you'll have students who actually, because that's a whole student produced document, they will then go through and talk about a certain habit and they will demonstrate it on those, and those play in advisory as of right now. So we've set up a system of commercials that are the commercials we produce to put that message out there on a more regular basis.
and we started the school year asking, classrooms to do community norms, student teachers to do community norms with their students. And, the hope would be that, because the Husky Habits kind of came after the school year had already started. So the hope would be that the Husky Habits are incorporated into our classroom norms. And so then you are regularly talking about what those behaviors look like. And when someone acts opposite of one of those behaviors in the classroom. So I would hope that kids begin to see it even more as they get more experience with having community norms in the classroom.
And though it's incentivized where they'll hear a peer, multiple people get Parker perks for demonstrating that behavior. So kids will be like, what's this? And adults in the building, and this happens in all common spaces. So not inside classrooms, but when they're in the lunchroom or in the hallway, as they demonstrate Husky habits, somebody's pointing that out to them. And that's what the Parker perk is for. So it's like, so glad that you were so responsible by having a pass while you were in the hallway and giving them a Parker perk. And so they're supposed to identify why they're getting it, so that the student knows, oh, I did that thing. And so that's how that happens. We just have winners of the month, but more people got the Parker perk than who won, because we can't,
And I think without incentives, we're having these conversations every day, every period of our classes that we're teaching. I know I am, I don't have Calvin coins or anything. We are, it's everything from the kids sprinting down the hall, and there's not much of a tardy punishment, but sprinting down the hall to get in class so they don't disappoint me. I wish I worked for all 126 students and not just 118 right now, but it's like having those conversations and just giving them praise for their efforts to get to my class on time, where it's not like I'm going to slam the door in their face and yell at them if they're late, but they've been recognized enough for what's good, corrected what's bad without some being sent to their dean, that they learn over time. And as a teacher myself, I had to change my norms after spring break, because I'm like, what I've done is not working well enough for one of my classes. My typical previous 17 years of teaching don't apply in this space, and I need to be stricter. And I've been stricter without being mean or without being punitive. They've lost some freedom and privilege, and they're surviving.
Stay resilient. Well, I think too, what we're gonna see is this is gonna be something, and JP, to your point, that's gonna be ongoing. And so, I think a lot of teachers are struggling, like, I've done this, I've been successful. I know Cheryl Lynn did a presentation a couple months back. I've done this all, and it's always been great. And I don't know what, this new crop of students need something different. And so I'm anticipating, that this is gonna be something in the next couple of years for our students, and constantly looking, seeing kind of based on what their needs are. But again, I cannot underestimate how much work is happening within the classroom spaces that make kids excited. Like if the kids spring down the hall, I kind of turn, oh, well, you're getting where you need to go. But kids want to do well because they really, they want to be here. They want to do well for their teachers. So I just want to make sure we get to the last one.
I was gonna say, I'm mindful of the time.
I am too, yes.
I know, we have 10 minutes, but I'm just gonna say we have 10 minutes. If we don't get to the emoji report, we'll do that in our last meeting.
And so the last, sorry, I'm toggling between two.
It's possession of a weapon.
Weapon,
Question was asked,
Right.
why
Look like.
why doesn't it? Why? Oh, here it is. Why does possession of a weapon other than a gun or lookalike gun start at a level 3 and one that does look like a gun start at level 5? Why is there a difference between the two? And the difference is what the weapon is. So a Boy Scout who forgot his pocket knife in his pocket, we are not trying to slam a hard consequence on, or so many things are weapons. And so we are sensitive to that and why kids might have certain things in school. And so that is why that starts where it starts, because not everything, they're all dangerous, but there is a level of severity that we have to consider.
I think it could, we were talking about this very recently, and not everybody in the room probably has a working understanding of SB 100 and when that was put in place and what that means. And I'm not asking for us to go to that in great detail, but there are restrictions for the first time a few years back that were implemented on exclusionary tactics that we can put in place as a school, and frankly, rightfully so, for when you can kick a kid out of school. And a look-alike, merely because it's present, doesn't satisfy a reason for exclusion from school, period. We simply, go ahead, you want to correct me on that, something subtle there, I think, right, Janelle?
The lookalike it depends.
On how it's used.
If it's used to threaten, intimidate, or
Right.
harm another person.
But other weapons,
I'm
other
using,
things that are a weapon.
I'm using the example of who's seen this thing, right? So just merely possession of this thing doesn't satisfy that criteria.
That's something to be brought up during the orientation, because there's no reason to have a lookalike or a gun.
No doubt about it, but I'm just explaining.
Right, I understand what you're saying.
We have the guardrails, so to speak, right?
I think it's important, probably maybe every time we have these conversations, to give that background.
Yeah.
Senate Bill 100 limited the use of out of school suspensions. If you go back, which I just did today, to all of our code of conduct for the last 10 years, one fight resulted in 5 days of out of school suspension. A pocket knife resulted in recommendation for expulsion. And this is in the time that I have worked here, I have implemented all of these consequences. And so the law changed. And it basically, I like to describe it as everybody gets to do something really, really bad one time before they get, what people will feel like, is a heavier consequence, to allow time to educate and intervene and see why this child committed the act that they did. And so there are it got rid of the zero tolerance policies that used to exist that I myself have had to implement. And that is really what this is about. And so when we think about, but that's really bad, the law says, if this child has never been intervened with, and this is their first time ever getting in trouble, and they do something really bad, you can't expel them. You have got to try some things first. And so that guides so much of the work that we do. And because our discipline consequences have always been progressive, if we're starting high, we don't have anywhere to progress to. And so we had to change, and that trickled all the way down to the classroom. How quickly do we send kids out of class because of classroom level behaviors? If we're sending them out because they're passing gas, they're being excluded from learning. Can we have some conversation about the gangs in the class and keep them in? And I'm using that because that used to exist. But if we had to change where we started, and that really drives so much of the work.
And if I could add just one piece of context, the first year when I got here, we did have a young man who had a lookalike that was discovered, and it was a lookalike gun. And I remember there was a frantic nature of, this kid has to go, like this just doesn't happen. And I remember specifically, because I asked the question like, well, have we asked any questions? And somebody looked me in the eye and was like, Linda, we don't allow weapons in this school. And I was like, I understand. The background I came from is there's always a story. So I just was interested in the story. This student was expelled, but in that story found out that this young person's relatives lived in a gang area, gang situation. So where they didn't live here, they were required to go there after school each day. And this was just something that that person used to show toughness to the people in that environment so he didn't get messed with, right? And I was like, oh, well, that's an interesting context. I'm not saying it's still what shouldn't have been, but interesting context when we just say nobody should have it, right? Well, no, I wouldn't, but I'm not, that's not my story, right? And I'm not, so it's almost like you have to, as a kid, figure out how do I live in both worlds? Because both worlds are true and real for me. So I get it, I can't have it here, but how do I go there? Because that's where I have to get every day after.
And
Right.
context, right?
Context.
Yeah, Laura, you had your hand.
Janelle, can you talk a little bit about the education that goes with the out of school suspension piece?
So education in terms of,
Well, we've talked about like with detention, a conversation with you to sort of change behavior, same with in-school reflection, really an effort on educating that child and trying to get them back in. And, so how does that work when you're out of school? You don't have the same opportunities.
so definitely, great question. So most kids who have an out of school suspension actually attend mentor instead of sitting at home. That's something that, people have varying opinions about how they feel about that. We have felt that it is better to be in a place being engaged with adults versus sitting at home on video games or out in the streets. And so for the most part, they attend mentor during this suspension where they communicate with our staff here to get the work and also process with the social work staff there why they are there. We then do a reentry meeting upon their return with their PSS team, team counselor, social worker, case manager, if that's appropriate, if that applies, to then talk about what the needs are for one at a time. And that includes regular check-ins. Every kid who is suspended is now kind of assigned to be worked with their social work on a pretty regular basis. And based on what the needs are, based on what this discipline incident was, that drives what we put in place for the child on that time.
It's clear that what you guys are doing now is so student driven and working with that child to get them to where they can be and where you want them to be in the school. And how are those processes documented so that they don't leave when you leave? Like, are there manuals about consequences like there is the BEP? How does that?
The reentry meeting is mentioned in here. I would say that it is documented what the process is.
I think also in addition to that, I think we're all, because obviously there's been new administration, there's new folks that are coming in, it's also looking at are there ways to streamline that, also with professional development, finding ways to say, okay, are we getting the most out of this?
Right.
Are we documenting the things and collecting the data that we need to collect? All those are the things we're constantly thinking about them, but those are great questions.
Yeah. We do a behavior support plan. That's a specific document about the behavior that needs to be worked with, the reentry. So I do think things are fairly well documented in here, but keep letting us know if you think of other ideas.
And Janelle's just not allowed to leave.
I know.
So, right, it's 7:58. Melanie has an announcement for us before we close. This has been really, really valuable. And the feedback, thank you all so much. I feel like going into our conversation with the board tomorrow night, I feel like the feedback and the input definitely has made a difference.
You want to do it?
No, no, no. I don't want it to be, but I also want it to be less than 15 minutes, okay?
Right,
That's my always request, can I get less than
You said
15
5
minutes,
minutes,
you do
you said
11.
5 in question.
But yes, it's really, this is why this committee exists, to ask these questions and to get this feedback and to really understand it. And I just want to add one additional layer of context to SB 100, because there has been a lot of conversation and a lot, like I've heard teachers say, well, you know, we can't punish kids anymore because there's SB 100. It's not, that's not what it was about. SB 100 was legitimately instituted and created by a student who was immediately kicked out of school for a very small infraction, which ultimately impacted her education moving forward and her ability to go to college and all of these other things. So it's not, it's basically SB 100 just says that you have to have some progression. You can't just, they do something and then goodbye, right? So, and that's really important to recognize, because when we were doing that, you do something and goodbye, guess who was goodbye the most, right? It was for Black, Indigenous, and students of color. So, you know, when we're looking at it on the whole, we just have to be really clear about what it really looks like. So I'm so appreciative of what you all have done. I want to give Melanie an opportunity to give us this fabulous announcement. Melanie.
Hi, guys. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And you can see me?
Well, we couldn't for a second.
You went off again.
I did.
There you are.
Can you see me now?
Yes.
Okay. So excited, you guys. Just really quickly, I know many of you who were with us last year remember that we were able to award 3 of our student panelists for CCB with the $500 Appleseed Scholarship. And this year we were able to award an awesome student by the name of Javeh Carter, who runs track, plays football, got accepted to NIU, has a 3.7 GPA, and he is just an amazing person. He was so excited to hear that he was our winner. And every time I run into people, they know him, which is really cool too. So I just really quickly wanted to invite everyone to come and say congratulations to him. Our very last Apple meeting this year will be the Appleseed Scholarship night, which we are going to be on campus, 2nd floor, Staff Cafe, 7 p.m. Come tell him that you're proud of him and wish him well. So that's
Yay, thank you, Melanie, thank you so much, and congratulations to Javeh, right?
She just said 7 p.m. Did she say the day?
Did you say 7 p.m.? What day is it, Melanie?
It's the second, I'm sorry, the first Tuesday in May. I believe it's May 2nd. I think that's the date. If I go off my screen, you guys won't see me, but it's the first Tuesday, 7 p.m. I will make sure to have it sent out to our entire CCB, team.
Okay, awesome.
May 3.
Thank you so much.
And I wanted to say one more thing too. One trend in all of our Appleseed Scholarship winners, they always have a crazy amount of classes. The student had over 48 credits. So, and not counting what he's doing this semester. So just wanted to say that our kids are really awesome.
Yes, that's awesome, Melanie. Thank you so much. Yes, so I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
JP motion. Second?
Third.
Okay, and a third. Okay, so anyone opposed to us adjourning tonight? No, I don't think so. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, people, for being on. Thank you.